Welcome to Pods with Posh and Paul, a podcast designed to inspire and challenge listeners through story, experience and insight. To face adversity, learn from suffering and discover how to embrace life with a heart filled with love and gratitude. We are so thrilled to have you journey with us and can't wait to share your stories. Join Sue O'Callaghan and Joanne Webb as we disrupt the theory that everyone has perfect lives. What does suffering and pain look like? How do the thoughts in our head direct the outcome of our life? How can we possibly master those thoughts and then change them so that we can not only survive adversity and conflict, but learn to live fully whole and free lives, removing constraint and lack? Mark Mandeno is the owner and director of Adventure Works, an Auckland-based outdoor education centre. While teaching his kids to surf in 2015, Mark fell off a surfboard into shallow water and received a spinal cord injury. Losing the use of 85% of his body, Mark has travelled an incredible inward journey to rediscover his purpose and identity, separate from the outward journey that had previously directed his life. As Mark shares with us his profound inward journey, he has much to teach us all on our search for truth, compassion, gentleness, and ultimately love. Hi Mark, welcome to ManPODS. We're so thrilled to have you with us today.
Yeah, good morning. Pleasure to be here, back again.
I know, we don't often have guests on twice in such a close time, but as our conversation flowed so beautifully last time, we wanted to hear so much more from you. We thought we'd get you back on board quick as.
Yeah, well, I don't know where we'll end up going with this conversation, and that's the exciting part of it, right? We'll just, I'm looking forward to it.
We are excited. So Mark, you had a major accident, a surf accident in 2015. And since then you have been on this incredible journey of finding yourself, obviously in a very different way, continuing the business. So what does that look like when you have such a major life change overnight that's not planned or expected?
Yeah, it looks like waking up in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to move. 85% paralyzed. So yeah, I've got 15% of my body that I can actually work. So yeah, it looks like lying in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, relying on everybody, relying on people to do absolutely everything, having no self-determination, I guess, or autonomy or independence.
And within that, there's a lot of time to think, isn't there? Because you can't escape from it, can you? At that time, there's a lot of time to lie there and think.
And I guess that was the first entry into this learning that I'm going through at the moment. Is that there are thoughts, and I listened to one of your conversations that you both had, and Joe, you were talking about the thoughts while you're running and the influence that those thoughts have on your ability to push through suffering and persevere. And I totally resonate. I think that most people can make sense of that what we think about affects what we experience, and that actually creates a whole lot of self-responsibility that we're not always willing to take on. Well, I'm not always willing to take on.
Yeah.
To really internalize the reality that what I think about affects what I experience means that I'm responsible for the experiences that I have. And there are times that I would rather not be responsible for the experiences that I have. I'd rather blame other people for things that are going on in my life. I'd rather deny responsibility. I'd rather avoid parts of myself that I have that I don't like, that are playing out in my experiences. I think it's easy to make sense of the fact that our thoughts affect our experiences, but then to really take that on board and to do something with it is a whole new...
For our listeners, then it's the journey you've been on is quite extreme in terms of suffering. We have guests coming on the podcast that have experienced adversity and conflict in all different areas of their life. But we do use mechanisms, tools, whatever, to avoid our thoughts in everyday life, but you very much in your situation, you couldn't avoid them. Joe and I've been reading recently Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. He talks about, first of all, just listening to that voice in your head, the resident lodger. What is that resident lodger saying? What conversations is being had? Because actually, you can't go on the journey of even changing your thoughts unless you're aware of what that conversation is that's going on in your head, can you?
I read that book at some stage within the first maybe year or two of my injury, and the who is having those thoughts is that question. And am I the thought, or am I the one that's having the thought? And what he's pointing to is that when I identify myself with the thought, then I suffer. It's simple as that, period. If I see myself as that thought, then I'm creating no end of problems in my life. So, for me, what that looked like was, suffering. If suffering is the result of the thoughts that I'm having, and not only just the thoughts that I'm having, but the meaning that I'm attaching to those thoughts, then I've got some work to do here. If I want to reduce suffering in my life, then I need to really take a look at the thought, but not just the thought, but the meaning that I'm associating with that thought, and then the way that I'm identifying myself through that meaning with that thought.
It's very confronting though, isn't it? Because as you said words like the other day, just earlier, you said you want to blame. It's easy to blame others or to hide or to deny. And they're all coping mechanisms at the end of the day, because sometimes we're not strong enough to look within, are we, and to take on board our thoughts, because it's a very, very confronting thing to do. And it's a very confronting thing to understand that actually we are in control, because it's much easier to blame. It's much easier to deny. And I think there is always that period of time, even as we talked about this layer of onion, and we can become enlightened, we can know something, yet then something else hits us and we can go back into blame, or we can go back into deny, but then we have to stop and we have to really think about our thoughts, and we have to look within and say, is this the truth? Is this what I'm feeling? Is this correct? And then turn your thought patterns around a little bit, I think, don't we? And it's continuous. It's always on the go.
Yeah. And the thoughts are really just an outcome of something else. What Michael Singer's what I picked up from him is that he's saying, get to know who is having the thought. The thought is just an occurrence, a circumstance. It's like the weather. It's something that we don't even have any control over, is what he's saying. That it's just psychic activity that's just rolling around inside us, just like the weather rolls around outside us. It's just activity, but there is an inner source to that activity. So get to know the source, not the activity.
So Mark, when you talk about the source, are you talking about being aware that was your parents' voice, that was a voice of a teacher at school, that was your voice that was sitting as a child when it was insecure or rejected? Are you aware of what voice it is that's speaking when you're analysing your thoughts?
Totally, right. Yeah, what is that source?
So where do they come from for you? Where have those sources sprung from?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? So I really like what Carl Jung has to say about some of this. His attempt at mapping out psychic activity is something that I quite enjoyed trying to get familiar with. For him, the source is this thing called the self, which is huge. It encompasses both our conscious activity and our unconscious activity, our unconsciousness of ourselves, but also that he talks about the collective unconscious, that there's our personal unconscious and our collective unconscious. And this is massive, and that is the source. That is where all this stuff comes from. So take that to something that I can do something with, then yeah, there's an experience, there's a moment that as a child of wanting to be loved and feeling valued and belonging, or as a teenager wanting to be accepted and wanting to, and then there's the psychic activity of being afraid of not getting that, and then there's the story that I tell myself to make sense of these big emotions in a younger state of being a child or a teenager, unable to cope with big emotions, and then pushing stuff away, repressing it. And that gets pushed down into lower levels and maybe to the point that I'm not even aware of it anymore. And then it emerges. When I get triggered by something in the world, that stuff emerges. The fear of not being loved in my relationship, triggers that deeper stuff that's buried in the self.
Such a vital word, isn't it? Because I think for listeners, we all get triggered. So if you look at, say, an argument between two people where one has hurt the other, that one person owns the hurt, but the other person owns the response. So there's ownership, and they're both responsible for their own part that they have to play in it. But we own our response, and that is how we get triggered into our insecurities, isn't it?
Yeah. And if that hurt is coming from a place that I haven't got familiar with within myself, then I'm going to continue to project it out and make sure it's outside of me, not inside of me.
And that's where we can go around damage other people, isn't it, if we do that? When we're not really choosing our reactions, when we are just reacting as a knee-jerk reaction, for instance, that's when we can easily hurt others, and we can say mean things, or we can behave in a way which is actually detrimental to ourselves and to others. But it's when we stop and take that time in between the source and then our reaction, when we stop and look within, then we choose how we react and be a bit calmer.
Yeah, I like that. This idea of hurting others or being hurt by others is a good thing to explore. But who's doing the hurting?
Yeah. Because hurt can only land on a platform. Hurt. If there's not a platform there on which it can land, it can't land.
It's a really hard concept for people to understand, I think, because it's that blame thing. You've hurt me. You caused this hurt. Your behaviour has done this. And don't get me wrong, people's behaviours trigger us, set off triggers, but we allow ourselves the response. If we choose to be hurt, as you said, there's a platform there of hurt already. It's actually really empowering once you get your head around it, but it takes a while to get your head around it.
And I think this is something that's very confusing, is this idea that to have personal power and strength actually means fully taking responsibility for yourself, not wanting other people to be different. If I'm attached to a thought, some sort of idea about how somebody else should be in order for me to be happy, and then I take a position that, well, in order, I need to use I statements and this idea of I need to share with this other person what I need from them in order for me to be happy, and I'm going to do it from a mature and a responsible way.
The irony in that, though, is really interesting, isn't it? Because the minute you step out of blame and you put ownership on you, true freedom comes from putting no expectation, having no need of somebody else's behaviour. You take all expectation and need off them, and then you can operate in total freedom, and then you can partner with them in a much more healthy way. But we often think in life, if I could just change that person, if they could just listen to what they're doing wrong, then everything will be okay. But true freedom only comes from that journey that we do in ourselves, finding or need an expectation within ourselves. But equally, it doesn't mean we have to accept everything either. And I think that's the important thing. Once you have that freedom, once you have that place of self-respect, then you can put your boundaries there. And boundaries are different from expectations, because we're not expecting somebody else to behave like a certain way. However, if they choose to behave in ways that are not within our boundaries, we can remove ourselves from that. Look, if you want to, I don't know, just say, do you want to go out drinking and gambling every single night? That's fine. That's your journey. However, I don't need to be part of that. So I'm going to remove myself from that. I'm not going to try and change you, because that's your journey. And it's different, whatever the situation is.
Yeah, the pain and the suffering comes from the meaning that you put into what it means to have that person drinking and gambling in your life. That activity is just, that behavior is just circumstantial activity in the world. It's just, it's not good or bad.
No.
We can judge it as good and bad. And then as soon as we judge it as good or bad, then we create a separation with that person, And then the next thing is, if I make meaning out of that judgment, that I need that person to be different in order for me to be happy, then we hold each other prisoner, really. I think that's what happens. I'm a prisoner to that person's behavior. I'm not going to be free until that person changes. And the same thing happens for the other person. They become a prisoner in that interaction between me. Yeah.
So Mark, obviously we're talking quite hypothetically here, and we've gone through a load of different theories, and we've brought in expert names, and that's all great. But here you were 5 years ago in hospital, having lost the use of 85% of your body, had lots of time to think. How has your journey been since then? Because obviously it's 5 years and you're still on your journey, you're still learning, you're still discovering. So what coping mechanisms or what techniques do you use on a daily basis to help you on your spiritual journey?
I look for moments in my day or moments in my thinking where I want anything to be different to the way it is. And I don't have to look very far to find those.
Wow, that's a big one, isn't it?
Right.
That's a really interesting one.
That
challenged me, and I think all our listeners. That's a really big one.
Yeah, and that I learned that from lying in the bed. I perceived there to be loss. For the first few years when I really struggled with the injury, I struggled because I thought that I'd lost something. I thought that I had lost something.
Wow.
I hadn't lost anything. What I had lost was an illusion of what I needed to have in my life in order to be meaningful and happy.
A story you told yourself, a picture you'd painted, or what we're led to believe from outside influences how your life's supposed to look.
Yeah.
I need to rewind that. I need to stop you there, because we'll have listeners thinking, but you've lost 85% of your body. So there's huge losses in there, because I, as a listener, can't comprehend losing, 5% of my body. How can you do that? How would that be possible?
Yeah, true. Well, what do I need? Well, I don't need much. And what I need is to be loved and to give love and to feel like I'm contributing to this world in a way beyond my little self, that there's something. So I believed early on in the injury that I wasn't going to be able to do much of those things. I had a story that how could I possibly, what a ridiculous idea to be running an outdoor education business in a wheelchair. So then, the next sort of level of that story was I loved being in the outdoors and I got meaning in the outdoors. And that's what I wanted to share with people. I can't do that myself anymore. I'm hopeless because I can't do much with my physical body. So maybe I need to find something else to do. Maybe I need to get rid of the business and do something else. So I went down that path for a while. Right, okay, the business, it's a burden. It's a liability and I can't see myself getting any meaning out of it. So I should find something else to do. Well, that didn't work out very well for me. I can't remember where this idea came from that I read, but that what is within us needs to emerge rather than me going out and finding some idea that I have to pursue. So it's either the bottom up, letting what is it within me find its way out. It's kind of like the idea of a seedling contains within it the whole mature grown tree. But the seedling or the sapling could never comprehend the potential of what it is to become. But the seedling might sit there, so this is the metaphor, it might sit there and look at another tree and go, I want to be like that. That's what I want to be like. So that's the outside in, top down. I need that. That looks good. I'm going to make my life work towards becoming that. But the seedling's never got a chance of doing that. So what the seedling needs to do is look within and go, right, I need to let what I don't know about myself emerge. So that is a roundabout way of saying I had to stop, pull myself back and go, what have I got right here around me right now? I've got beautiful kids, a supportive wife. I've got a business full of people that love what they're doing, just go with that.
Yeah.
Start with that.
That's so interesting you say that, because I was going to ask you earlier when you were talking about Jung, we talked about the internal dialogue, the voices in our head, and then also there's a universal consciousness. And I was going to ask you, when those voices, you can train those voices in your head or silence those voices in terms of I need, I want, this is the direction I'm going to go, and you silence the direction that you plan that you want to go on. Does it then open the door to the universal consciousness where you're then in flow for the strengths that you have and what is internally within you to emerge naturally, as opposed to so you come out of one and can kind of open the door into another. So we're always looking for abundance to come our way. We're looking for the flow and the freedom to sit in that very place. That's what we're all desiring and searching for. That as you silence those voices, does it mean you can open the door much more into that universal consciousness?
Yeah. The collective unconscious that he talked about was represented through like familiar archetypes and dream imagery that people would have that had no relationship with the imagery, but it would be familiar and similar. So, but what when you were describing that, what I really connected with was this idea of loving our fate, and it's this idea that how do I know what is good or bad for me anyway? How do I know that is this injury bad for me? I can judge it and then I'll suffer, but it's what happened. So go with it. That was fated. There's I've got this. I just happen to have this one lying around here. This is Epictetus, one of the Stoic. There are three main Stoic philosophers that wrote a couple of thousand years ago. And he said, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen."
That's powerful. Can you just read that again, Mark?
Yeah, don't demand that things happen as you wish. That is huge in itself, right? Because it's very confronting that, whose life is this that I'm living? And what are we teaching our kids around becoming self-determining? And we want them to go out and live lives that they wish for. This is a problem.
Yeah.
We want ourselves to live lives that we wish for. We have, we're goal setting and being aspirational and wanting our lives to be certain ways is very familiar in our dialogue and what we talk about and what we teach. But he says, don't demand that things happen as you wish.
And that comes back to what you say, which is when you start judging something, you suffer. So for listeners in situations, that's quite challenging, for listeners that, losing jobs through COVID, facing relationship breakdown, or even empty nesters. When you start to judge something, you suffer, because that again comes back to ownership, doesn't it? I've got to actually own the situation I'm in, and that's really tough when you sit and confront real suffering and struggle. I think you've got some ownership over it is really quite a difficult challenge to face. I think when you're in the midst of suffering, to look within and to look in the eye and say, actually, it comes down to me.
Yeah. So, imagine going through a relationship breakup and then to try and accept this next statement, but wish that they happen as they do happen. Really?
Wow. But then that's also really interesting, isn't it? Because Joe and I have been through quite adverse suffering in our lives, and I look back to my greatest suffering in 2003, which I thought would actually lead me to death, psychological death, and even physical death to some extent. And yet, how many years later, 17 years later, that was my greatest growth and learning, and I wouldn't swap it for the world now to really have the life I can have. But the pain when you're in it, and for listeners, although you can look back and say, okay, I can see what it was all about, so I can accept it, or I'm grateful for it. For listeners that are in that place of severe pain, we get it. It really is raw. It really is tough. It really is challenging in every extent of your life, psychologically taking you to the place of death. And that's, I guess, all the religious messages, isn't it? That you kind of die to self, die to ego. But when you're in it, it's tough. So I just want to acknowledge that for listeners. But then you can look back and say, well, actually, was this my journey? Was this my path? Yes, it was. And what's come out of it? And that kind of going back to universal consciousness, coming back to that place where the freedom that comes out, the inner joy, the peace, the turmoil leaves, and you're on this continuous journey, never arriving, but continually enjoying the pleasure of the moment rather than the plans you had for your life.
Absolutely, right. And yeah, am I the thing that's consumed in that suffering, or am I the thing that can step back and take a look at it as just an unfolding part of my fated life?
And actually, when you do take a step back and look, it's almost like looking from an outer body experience, isn't it? Taking yourself away and looking over the situation. You can think about it a lot more rationally as well. Yes, there still may be hurt involved, because at the end of the day, we are human. We are full of emotions, and our ego is still there, unless you've this much bigger higher power, which we're not. We're just measly human beings, bless us. But once you take a step back and look within the situation, and you realise that you've learned some lessons, you've been through adversity, you've been through suffering, and you know they haven't actually killed you. They have actually made you stronger. And yes, this adversity that you're currently going through may be different than anything you've ever experienced before. So there's still a heck of a lot of lessons to learn within this new experience, yet you know you're going to learn them, and you know you're going to come out the other side. So you take that step back, look within and go, oh, okay, I can choose now to allow this to consume me, or I can just take it step by step, take each little lesson and each little moment by moment.
Yeah, and that's what these Stoic philosophers really talk about, is wanting, not avoiding our suffering, but wanting our suffering for what it can teach us.
Yeah.
And that suffering is really just another form of experience, but we're associated with something that we don't, that's bad. But it's not avoidable. So
I love some of the metaphors, Mark. In the Bible, when the Israelites were held in captivity in Egypt, the captivity was slavery and bondage to the self, to the ego, to the I. And it was really interesting, because when they were released from Pharaoh's rule, Pharaoh being that bondage and slavery, they were promised entrance into the promised land, into freedom and abundance and universal consciousness. But what's really interesting is they went into the desert, and some were there for 40 years. And when they were in the desert, they faced all the ites, the Hittites, the Jebusites. And the ites were anger, rage, insecurity, bitterness. And they had to go round and round in that desert place until they overcame the ites, which is our own, our own fears and our own enemies and our own insecurities. And only then did they enter into the promised land. What did the promised land look like? It looked like complete freedom and abundance of universal consciousness.
Yeah, and that was all internal.
Yeah, the whole journey was internal. And I love that. We can't come out of that place of slavery to the I and to the ego and go straight into that promised land. There is that journey to do. And it could take 40 years, or it could be that we never go there, but that's a choice. And we can actually, somebody once said to me, so you can actually accelerate that journey. You could do that in 40 years, or you could do it in 5 years if you want. How long do you want to spend doing that journey where you just wander around, or even go back into Egypt? And what's interesting is a lot of the Israelites wanted to go back into Egypt because there was more security and stability in bondage to the I. That's a challenge.
Comfort in our suffering.
The metaphor is totally there, isn't it? Because how many people do you see in life who continuously live within their suffering? They don't learn from it. They suffer, and they almost, they go into victimhood, don't they? This always happens to me. Why is this happening to me? Or that's where bitterness, resentment, rage, anger, you can see that they're this pent up emotion of all of that, and they're within their suffering because it's familiar, and that's kind of heartbreaking as well, isn't it? Because that there's a different way to do it.
And until it's integrated, until we create a relationship with the source of that suffering, the world is going to keep teaching us that lesson.
So Mark, how have you're running an outdoor education business, as you say, and you've got a tertiary education section to it now. You're doing incredible work with young people in outdoor education. How have you integrated that journey you've been on into business? Do you feel like it's translated into the work that you're doing in outdoor education?
Yes and no. Actually, I kind of struggle to integrate the injury into it, because I don't see myself as injured. I do what I used to do, but I do it from a wheelchair.
I guess I'm not talking about the injury, but I'm talking about the spiritual journey. Have you integrated the spiritual journey being in the outdoor education environment?
Yeah, Well, I struggle with that as well, but I love taking opportunities, when we're at the base and we've got students on our challenge course doing our programs. If I can get in front of those students and just go, hey, I run this business and I'm in a wheelchair and this is what I want you guys to get out of your program here. I really enjoy that, and I know the instructors enjoy it when I get that chance, and I presume the students do. I never really get to hear what they think afterwards. So yeah, I do enjoy being able to share like that. But the real joy, the real sense of fulfillment and satisfaction I get at the moment is more from the team that I work with and their commitment to what we do. What the business, the business, I see it as it's not me. It's something that I imagined and created, and now there's a whole lot of other people that see it as important to them, and I love that. That's all I need.
But I guess what you're doing is you're leading from a place of integrity, authenticity, autonomy, all of values, which is in universal consciousness. If you're leading from that place, you're opening the door to the realm of abundance to come into other people's lives, because it's top down, isn't it? It flows. Yeah. And so I'm just wondering whether business has changed because of that. Because obviously you're inspiring lives and you're mentoring so many people. Even if you're not speaking about your own experience, you as a person, the energy shift around you will be so different that you'll be inspiring people even without having to speak to them.
Yeah, and I think there is a direct relationship between the boundaries that I put around my psychic self with fear and what manifests itself in the real world. So when I let go of being afraid, wonderful things occur.
But you're also living your passion and purpose as well. I mean, you said that you tried to step away from that business and it didn't work for you because it was your dream. You had that vision. You tried to step away from it. Well, it's not going to work because that is your passion and purpose. So to live, as Sue says, in authenticity, in integrity, running a business which is based on passion and purpose. And then you've got, of course, you've invited all of these people in who equally share that same vision, that when we open ourselves up, the people come, like-minded people, we get our tribe.
Yeah. I struggle with this idea of passion and purpose as well, to be honest, because that was what created a real internal conflict for me for a while. There was, because I'm also, I'm passionate about supporting other people. I trained as a counselor years ago, and I thought, well, maybe that's my purpose. Maybe my purpose is to experience this injury, learn about myself through it, and then support other people. So that was a really alluring thought. But what it did was it took me away from what was present in my life in that moment, which was the business, and it was a dream. It was an illusion. So that's this kind of bottom up or top down idea that I'm thinking about. The bottom up was, this is what I've got. This is where I am. I'm working out how to live my life in a wheelchair, and I have this business. Let's just do this bit, do this now, and see where it goes.
And I love that message of staying where you're at. So before we close, Mark, for people that are in a situation right now of suffering and pain, it's so easy, and I speak for myself here, to say that, I want to avoid that. I'll go out with some girlfriends, I'll go shopping, or, I'll keep myself busy to avoid it. What is the message if you're in that place right now, instead of keeping yourself busy, instead of avoiding it?
Well, that reminds me of a Joseph Campbell quote. And it goes something like, the cave you fear holds the treasures that you seek.
Powerful.
Go with courage, go into the cave, because you're not going to die, but I believe I'm going to die. Before I go into that cave, I absolutely believe that I'm going to suffer some psychological death, which is actually just an ego illusion that's going to die, and I need it to die in order for me to move on to the next level of my awareness and love in the world.
Yeah. So not only are you going to go into the cave and not die, but you're also going to find the treasures
that you seek
in that very place.
Yeah. And then once you've done that one, there'll be another one.
We so know that. Damn it.
Yeah. But you'll be able to look back at that one that you did get through and go, oh my God, I'm so pleased, you know. Look at the love that I have in my life now as a result of that. I want the next one. I want to find the next cave.
Yeah. And that's where resilience is built as well, isn't it? We build the resilience. We learn that skill a little bit more each time, and our courage comes a little bit easier next time.
Yeah. But resilience is not avoiding the cave.
No.
Resilience is going into the cave. It's not about building some boundary around the cave so that you don't fall into it. And I think this is a bit of a, you know, something that we need to be cautious about when we talk about resilience, is that resilience is not putting a protective fence around the cave so that we don't have to experience that. Yeah, putting the fence down, and with courage and sensitive love for ourselves, you know, take one little step at a time into that cave, and eventually we'll get to the end of it and find the treasure that's been waiting for us. Yeah.
Well, as always, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, to share your incredible wisdom and insight, and we'll just leave the listeners with that, you know, take the courage of your journey, the wisdom that you share, the inspiration of your journey, that we can take the courage that you've shared with us and manifest that in some way in our own lives. Thank you so much for coming on board today, and we look forward to hearing some more stories from you later on at some stage. Thank you.
Kia ora. Yeah.
Thanks so much for being with us today. For us to inspire others to live their magnificently imperfect life, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or on your podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Pods with Posh and Paul. We can't wait for you to join us on our next episode. Love, light and peace.